What's up, psychedelic investors? My name's James, and boy, do we have a special episode for you today. Last week, I had the pleasure of interviewing Timothy Ko, CEO of Entheon Biomedical, and we're going to be showing you that interview today. For those of you that don't know, Entheon Biomedical is a company that's working on treating addiction with DMT, which is honestly one of the coolest projects I've heard about in the entire psychedelic medicines field. And this is going to put them in direct competition with MindMed, who later this year is also planning on launching their own DMT trials. So before we get into the episode, I just want to introduce you to this good boy here. His name is Chester, and if you agree with me and think he's a good boy, go ahead and smash that like button. If this video gets 300 likes, I am going to buy him a nice big bone from you guys to say thank you. Enjoy the episode. Hello, psychedelic investors, and I'd like to welcome you today to our interview with Timothy Ko, CEO of Entheon Biomedical Corp. And Timothy, I just want to say right off the bat, thank you, not only for being here today with our viewers, but also for all the hard work you're doing. So as many of my viewers are aware, right now our Earth is in the middle of not only a global healthcare crisis, but also a global mental health care crisis. So anybody that's putting in the hard work, or any company that's putting in the hard work to alleviate this, earns my badge of respect right away. So Timothy, thank you for all the hard work you're doing. Thank you for being here today. And how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. No worries. So my first question is, why was Entheon created, and what are the problems it's trying to solve?
Yeah, so I guess Entheon came about as a result of, a response to a very personal event that took place in my life. Actually, yesterday marks a 2-year anniversary of the loss of my brother. I lost my brother to, no, and I appreciate that. I lost my brother to drug addiction. He succumbed to a fentanyl overdose in the back end of March of 2019. And so what I witnessed, before it resulted in that very acute event that was his death, my brother suffered for about 2 decades. Went to a whole host of residential treatment programs, suffered institutionalization, was on a variety of medicines such as methadone and Suboxone, as well as a bunch of like antidepressants, anxiolytics, and things of that nature. Interacting with 12-step recovery, with psychotherapy and all those things. But over the course of that 20 years, there was a further descent into suffering, and he really wanted to get better. And he very earnestly expressed that, but ultimately the limitations of conventionally available methods just weren't adequate to serve him. Despite the best efforts of the physicians and psychiatrists, there are a lot of people that really wanted to help, but due to the limitations of the medicines and therapies that existed, that help just wasn't there. And so Entheon was created in honor of that, to try to reduce some of the suffering in the world and to really bring the transformational power of psychedelics into a usable format that can help people really dive into themselves and reorder their understandings of their own life, where they sit within the world, and really focus on the development of healthy belief systems that will ultimately, result in new behaviors that are beneficial to them.
Well, thank you for sharing such a personal story. I know it must be tough. So I guess my next question would be, why DMT? What made Entheon and you personally fall on this particular compound as opposed to, say, psilocybin or something else?
Totally. That was a very consultative process. So I'm sure for those that are aware of Entheon, we do have a pretty robust scientific advisory board comprised of people like Matthew Johnson, Robin Carter-Harris, Christopher Timmerman, Dennis McKenna, to name but a few. And so, one of the early things that we did was validate, seek validation for the idea that psychedelics could be transformational, could drive at the core of trauma and really reorder a person's understanding of themselves. But then in thinking about, hey, what is necessary? What are these risk factors associated with psychedelic usage? And some of the realities about treating people that are ultimately undergoing a very profound experience. We arrived on DMT because, due to its short and powerful nature, rather than keeping someone, engaged into a very, sometimes potentially overwhelming experience, along the timelines that psilocybin, LSD, and ayahuasca provide, the reality is these things are very profound and powerful. And so keeping someone engaged in that 4 to 8 hours of very intense psychedelic immersion could potentially prove challenging. And so with DMT, we understand that we can create these very profound moments that allow for that transformation, but doing so in such a way that if a person, for whatever reason, is unable to be there, and they're expressing distress, we can stop the flow of DMT and have that experience end within about 10 or 15 minutes. That person could return to a functional baseline. And so that gives us flexibility in terms of safety, but also gives us flexibility in terms of how we structure the therapies. Rather than all be reliant on this one long form therapy, we could potentially have shorter therapies that allow for a variety of things, increased sense of safety for the administering physician, but also, the ability for that physician to, from a revenue perspective and a usability perspective, potentially see more patients per day, ultimately resulting in hopefully a net greater effect.
Okay. That's really interesting, because I know that one of the limiting factors of, say, LSD-assisted therapy would be that huge length of time. It would be just frankly too expensive to pay a therapist to look over you for 8 hours when most of the people in our society right now really couldn't afford that. So the main reason for DMT is the duration. So that's really interesting and good to know. So my next question, I guess, is if everything goes well with treating addiction, are you looking at any other diseases or maladies to treat with using DMT?
Yeah, so to pull it back into the maybe non-Western context, I think some of the psychedelics that have been sort of known anecdotally researched for a while, sometimes not within a DSM pathology type of categorization. In traditional use, we know that psychedelics are useful for treating a variety of diseases of despair, whether it's a sense of existential aimlessness, a sense of lack of direction, or just a lack of meaning. I think DMT is good at addressing the most important core questions that a person possesses that sometimes exhibit as things like, addiction or process addiction, and even things like depression. I think there are other people that are quite interested in that too. And so we understand that, for us, the urgency is treating those with addiction-related issues, but we see the opportunity for DMT to be directly useful in treating a variety of these things that come from that core. So whether that's depression, obsession, or a variety of other classic mental health diagnoses.
So just to repeat what you said there, just to make sure that I understand it, what you're saying is kind of DMT isn't necessarily treating the addiction or what be it, it's treating the underlying trauma which is causing the addiction, or which could perhaps cause depression or another issue, but it's this underlying trauma that the DMT is attempting to treat. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, in broad strokes, yeah. Whether it's, trauma is an inherently difficult thing to define, but ultimately, I think the approach that we're taking is driving at what's at the root of what's driving the behavior. And so in a lot of cases, it will be trauma. In some cases, it will be, malformed attachment that sort of takes shape over the course of a lifetime. But yeah, rather than, treating the symptoms like methadone and Suboxone, things like that, try to manage the symptomology of the expressed type of disorder. We really want to drive at the core of the the foundation of the disorder is. And so we believe that DMT is effective in doing that.
Awesome. Well, that's so great to hear. I guess my next question is, you guys have a clinical trial coming up, a phase 1 clinical trial. So first of all, congrats for that. That's a huge, amazing first step. And I was just wondering if you could walk us through what this trial is going to be measuring.
Yeah. So at the foundation of any type of regulatory engagement is a strong foundation of safety. So this is primarily a safety trial, but it's an adaptive trial. So we're going to be doing some dose finding, but also looking at things like pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, as well as a variety of other related measures.
Could you actually explain what those two things are for our viewers who might not necessarily know?
I'm not the science officer, so I'm not the most adept at explaining this,
Fair
but
enough.
Ultimately, like learning the sort of the chemical mechanisms by which DMT interacts with the body, and yeah, like looking at from a receptor binding perspective, how it interacts, but also looking at things like toxicology and safety and the sort those as, safety related measures. But in addition to that, we're also looking to see if there is some outcome related to smoking cessation. It's not a super robustly structured protocol as it relates to quit smoking, but looking to see if there is a early indication or early signal that there is some efficacy there. And of course, from that safety trial, we are going to be expanding into a variety of substance-specific trials within nicotine, alcohol, and opiates following that. But of course, needing to base that on a strong foundation of safety.
Okay. So right now for the phase 1 trial, the overarching primary concern is just making sure it's safe. And then the secondary goal is to see how well it treats, so not how well, but if it is effective in treating addiction in terms of nicotine. And then we want to expand this in the future once we get to phase 2 trials. I have that correct? Perfect.
Yeah, you do.
Fantastic. And what do you think of the timeline for this? Are we talking 1, 2, 3, 5 years?
I think that some of the realities in terms of drug approvals are in that sort of medium to long-term range. Ultimately, these drug approvals do take quite a long time, and that's for a very important reason. I think regulators, because their duty of care is to the individual that's going to be actually receiving these drugs, does have to require companies like ours to engage in very rigorous and empirical clinical research. And so we envision, optimistically that the timeline is anywhere from 4 to 6 years. But along that way, there are going to be significant de-risking events as the proof of the trials becomes known. But we've also identified the need for an opportunity to address a as of yet unmet market need within the psychedelic space. And so we're going to be creating revenue generating opportunities in the meantime. One of the things that we're really excited to announce soon is the commercial availability of our genetic test kit. And that falls within this sort of larger ambition of Entheon's to really understand what constitutes an individual's potential response to psychedelics, not just DMT, but things like ketamine, psilocybin, et cetera. Because ultimately, our duty of care is to the patient, the individual that is taking the brave step of saying, hey, I'm tired of suffering and I want to get better. We want to provide the tools and the standards to service not only our own clinical research, but the rest of the industry, so that when someone is on the precipice of wanting to get better from treatment-resistant depression, we want to provide the genetics basis as well as the neurological basis to assess what drugs are appropriate and what preparatory treatments are going to be effective in terms of maximizing the potential of that drug-related event. And so the genetics test kit, it's not yet disclosed the specified date around it, but available soon. And we have ambitions to expand our investigations in the world of EEG to provide another snapshot, another foundational basis upon which physicians can then, take a more data-focused approach to assessment, prescription, and treatment.
So I'm so happy that you brought up the genetic test done by your subsidiary Halogen, because that was actually my next question. And I actually just recently learned about this and did some reading on it. And I found it so fascinating. I had never really thought before of the possibility that a person could be genetically predisposed to having a quote unquote like bad trip. I always thought it was kind of like, the general setting, that type of thing. So I was just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more, if you're able to, on this test by Halogen. So what is it exactly doing? Is it looking at your genome or, over to you.
So it's a very targeted test. There's only 5 biomarkers in it right now, and it's our first opening foray into this world of genetic testing. But we do know that there are specifically 5 very key biomarkers that will dictate whether a person has a slow or fast metabolism of certain drug classes. That slow or fast metabolism of certain drug classes will dictate if the drug experience is powerful or maybe ineffective. And so understanding too that there are some psychedelic related risk events that take place, whether it's propensity for a schizophrenic response or psychotic response. We also have the presence of those biomarkers that detect for propensity for that. Again, just trying to provide that simple basis for, I guess, the evolving reality of the psychedelic industry. I think we all know what the news stream is and what the envisioned path forward over the course of the next 4 or 5 years is. But as we see more drugs moving through the clinical approvals process, physicians in not too long will be tasked with a very important choice. Someone may walk in off the street and say, "Hey, doctor, I'm very depressed, and it's become apparent that I want to treat it. Other things haven't worked for me, and now I want to take the brave step of taking a psychedelic." In about 4 or 5 years, there may be a multitude of molecules that are proposed for the treatment of depression, and so understanding what makes a certain drug experience appropriate for an individual has to be based on more than just subjective sort of narrative-based measures where a lot of the interpretation takes place. And so, we're trying to develop those tools. The Halogen genetic test kit is a first step in that, but we're also looking at the world of EEG to provide, if we look at genetics as the nature component of what makes a person tick and what their individual response to drugs might be, there is also a nurture component that takes a snapshot of who a person is the day that they arrive in that doctor's office. So, all those things combined are developing into a predictive diagnostic platform that we're eager to be developing.
So yeah, that's amazing. Like I said, I had never thought of this before, and it's honestly one of the coolest developments that I've read about in this industry writ large in a long time. So just last question to round it out here, and it's a two-part question. Where do you see both Entheon in 5 years, and then the wider landscape for psychedelic medicines?
Yeah, I think I've sort of been touching on it in bits and pieces, but I see Entheon as certainly developing out a new molecular entities, getting its core DMT-focused drug through the approvals process. We have a very strong literature basis to presume both safety and efficacy, but doing all the necessary steps to get it into the data form factor that regulators need to see. But then the other component that I talked about, sort of Entheon wanting to occupy is, having a duty of care to those that are suffering, that are making that choice of, getting help, providing the tools and standards that are necessary to service not just Entheon's own internal development goals, but creating tools that can be deployed at ketamine networks, at psilocybin clinics, at a variety of these sort of clinic networks that are popping up, ultimately to develop an understanding of what makes a psychedelic safe for prescription. We want to, and we have ambitions as well as sort of funds set aside for the development of the furtherance of that diagnostic platform, not just within DMT, but also across a broad spectrum of molecules. We recently invested into a US-based ketamine network, and so that should signal where some of our intentions lie. Just trying to broaden our utility to mankind as well as the psychedelic industry that serves mankind.
Perfect. So I just want to highlight to all my viewers something that you said there that I find is very, very cool, very enlightening. You use the phrase, "we have a duty to care." It's not something like to make money off of. It's, we have a duty to do this. People are suffering, and it's our responsibility to really try to find new avenues of care. So do you have anything else you'd like to say before we end the interview?
No, I just really want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we're doing here and why we care. So I really appreciate it. And I just encourage everyone to join our socials, sign up for our newsletter. We're always working on some very interesting things that ultimately do service humanity. And so would love everyone to be in the news stream.
And where can people find that? Through your website?
Website, entheonbiomedical.com, as well as our socials. You can find them all on our website, and you can sign up for a newsletter there too.
Perfect. So everybody go check out the website he just said. Thank you so much, Timothy. I had lots of fun. This was a great and enlightening interview. And I hopefully will talk to you again sometime soon.
You too. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Bye-bye. Oh, you guys are still here. Well, if you enjoyed the video, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. My dog is counting on you. I'll see you next time. This is James from the Psychedelic Investor, signing out.